Thank you for joining us on the test bench. Before we get started, I'd like to apologize for my slick COVID cut, but that's just the way she goes these days. I think by now we've all seen the nVidia showcase for the 30 series cards, in addition to a lot of the analysis surrounding them. What's really blown people's minds here is the purported increased performance we're going to get over the 20 series. The nVidia generations have kind of had a history since the 700 series of having a 25 to 30% a 25 to 35% performance increase generation over generation. And what that really meant was each generation, the model numbers that are lower will get about as fast as the model number one slot higher. For example, with the 700 series, you had your 780. Then when we moved to the 900 series, they skipped the 800 series. The 970 was as powerful as the 780. Then when we get to the 10 series, the 1060 is as powerful as the 970. So once you have a few generations, your flagship performance has become mid-range or even bottom range. We didn't have that last time with the RTX 20 series cards because it was the first generation of the RTX ray tracing cores. And also, they kind of bifurcated the lines into GTX 1600 for the cards that didn't have ray tracing. That led to weird things like the 2080 barely outperforming the 1080 Ti. And then the 2080 Ti kind of being in a league of its own. But not quite a Titan, which is what you'd expect to have had it bumped up to. Now, with this 30 series, what's going on is the 2070 is going to have performance on par, a little higher than the 2080 Ti for $499. That is a significant price decrease considering the 2080 Ti cost $1,200 to $1,400 on launch. Then the next step up, our 3080, is purportedly going to have twice the performance of the 2080 for $700. So it's launching to similar price as its predecessor. Then it seems to be that they're getting rid of the idea of a Titan and a Ti after the 80 and making a 3090 for $1,500 that might have up to 60% more performance than the 2080 Ti. That is a ridiculous generational performance increase. It's also kind of a huge FU to 2080 Ti buyers, but we'll talk more about that as we go on here. The big question, though, is why is nVidia doing this? Because right now, they're going to be giving away their previous generation flagship performance for $500, which, while not exactly mid-range, is upper mid-range or lower high-end pricing. More than likely, the reason this is happening is so they can bury AMD before AMD can even get a foothold in the next generation of GPUs. nVidia definitely does not want to go the way of Intel. Intel did not take first generation Ryzen seriously. First gen Ryzen came swinging out of the gate. The Ryzen 7 1700 and 1700X were slightly behind Intel's flagship at the time, which was the i7 7700K, which is what I previously had. But they were just slightly behind that in performance in gaming and blew it out of the water for productivity. Intel, for their next generation, added a couple more cores, but that wasn't enough to hold off AMD. AMD came out swinging with the Ryzen 2000 series and the Ryzen 3000 series. And now we're at the point where AMD is dominating at the low end and mid-range. And at the high end, Intel still has that gaming CPU crown, but they're just eking out a few extra frames to do that. To the point that if you have a high-end CPU and you don't just do gaming, you're going to go with AMD because the 3900 and 3900, the 3900X and the 3950X absolutely blow Intel out of the water for productivity. So, nVidia doesn't want that happening to them. The next console generation is being powered by AMD's big Navi and has ray tracing and a bunch of other bells and whistles. And all the indications are that this is extremely pared down from what they're going to do on the desktops. AMD's also expressed interest in just competing at the high end of this time, which historically they haven't done. Or if they have, they do it too late. The 5700 XT, which AMD released last year, is a great example. It has performance on par with a 1080 Ti. The problem with that is it came out about 6 or 7 months after nVidia launched the 20 series, so it was competing with the 2070 and 2070 Super. That brings us back to price. When nVidia launched the 20 series cards, they had two things going on. Tensor cores were still relatively new, and their processes for making them and implementing them weren't mature yet. So what happened was, it was very expensive. So, I'm not saying they didn't make a nice, tidy profit off of 2080 Ti's. What I'm saying is, they would have been more expensive to make than 3080s or 3070s. In addition to that, they had absolutely no competition from AMD at that level. What NVIDIA is doing this time is they're hedging their bets. They have the 3070, so they're automatically making AMD compete on price for a high-end part, which AMD typically could not historically do with their GPUs. Their GPUs always come out too late and a little too underpowered. So they have the 3070 coming out at $499. Then they have the 3080 coming out at $799. And they have the 3090 coming out at $1,500. So you notice there's a bunch of gaps in those prices. So once AMD drops big Navi, let's say they drop something that performs on par or slightly better than a 3070 for $600. All NVIDIA has to do is slap more VRAM into a 3070, boost the clocks a little, slot it at not a $500, a $600 price point, and call it a day to bury that. That also gives them a lot of maneuvering room between that $800 price point that the 3080 is coming out at and that $1,500 price point that the 3090 is coming at, to make cards with any kind of performance they want at virtually any price point they want, to guarantee that they can undercut AMD on cost and outperform them. Which is a shame, because I always like a good underdog story. I'm hoping Intel gets good again, because they've been trounced the past couple years here. I'm not saying Intel makes terrible processors or anything. I'm just saying the price to performance proposition of an Intel CPU versus a AMD CPU really isn't currently there. There are a lot of things that Intel CPUs are superior for. Something I just found out, and we'll explore together in an upcoming video, is that apparently you can't play an HD Blu-ray on a computer without an Intel library that specifically only runs on Intel chips. I don't know if that's more legitimately good or just a monopolization practice, but I would also say that I'm an edge use case for that technology. But enough about the processors. This is about GPUs. I can say, in my experience, the only AMD / ATI, that's how long I've been around, GPU I've ever owned and found to be worthwhile was a 580. But I haven't used a 5700 XT or 5700 XT, so can't vouch for those ones. I understand that those ones had some driver issues, which hopefully AMD can resolve for Big Navi. As far as the real-world performance of the new NVIDIA cards is going to go, that's something you're going to have to wait and see on. As somebody who currently has a 2080 Ti, I'm excited to see what the performance difference between the 2080 Ti and the 3070 is going to be. I'm also interested to see if the 3080, having double the performance of the 2080, translates into something meaningful. They did an official benchmark today for Doom Eternal with the 3080 Ti, and it showed that it had a 45% uplift over the 2080 Ti, which means that realistically in most games, because this was probably cherry-picked, you're looking at a 35% to 40% increase in most things. So that especially makes me excited to see the difference between the 3090 and the 2080 Ti as well. I am only going to be able to acquire one of those new GPUs to test, and it is more than likely going to be the 3090, because I don't have any connections to the larger industry here. The 3070 is not going to be worth the value proposition for me, because it's such a marginal upgrade for $500, when I can go ahead and get something that blows the 2080 Ti out of the water on paper. We still need to see all the official benchmarks for it, and I am doing my best. I am eyeing up getting one of the Strix models for testing, so that should be super interesting. Something I noticed with those is the 3090s have a 400 watt power draw under maximum load. That means current power delivery methods can't supply that, because the PCIe slot on your computer can only deliver 75 watts of power, and your 8-pin PCIe connector can only deliver 150 watts. So 2 PCIe connectors and a PCIe slot's only going to get you 375 watts. What they've done is they've come up with a 12-pin Molex connector. I don't know if it's a standard connector, just no one's ever really used before, if this is an AMD only, or excuse me, an NVIDIA only thing. But my understanding is that you can plug 2 PCIe connectors into it, which I still don't know how that's going to generate enough power. And then if you have a modular power supply, what they're also going to come out with is dedicated connectors that plug directly into this power supply, then plug into the card. I'm sure every major manufacturer is going to come out with those. What I noticed on the Asus Strix 3090, because that's really the only 3090 I've really been able to take a deep dive into so far, is that it has 3 PCIe connectors on it, which, everything else aside, is going to lead to some weird looking builds, because with my cable mod extension kit, it only came with 2 PCIe cables. So I'm going to have to take the original one or shell out an additional $60 to cable mod for 1 cable, which I don't think is a effective use of money. So from here on out, it's going to be some pretty exciting times. The 3080 comes out September 17th, and the 3090 comes out September 24th. So that'll give me a nice big long weekend to hopefully procure a 3090 for you and get you some good test results. And as always, thank you for joining us on the Test Bench. Like this video and subscribe to the Test Bench. Feel free to join us on Facebook. Back us on Patreon if you want to help us show you more cool stuff. And follow us on Twitter. Thanks for watching. And be sure to check out our other videos. I hope this thing's still recording because it took a fall. Yep, it's definitely still recording. All right.